1953, East Tupelo High School. A quiet teenager with slicked back hair stepped onto the classroom stage, clutching a beat-up guitar. His teacher smiled politely until he started to sing. When the laughter hit, Elvis froze. She told him, "You'll never make it." 2 decades later, that same woman stood in a stadium of 12,000 as he proved her wrong. The air inside East Tupelo High was heavy with chalk dust and June heat. Ceiling fans clicked lazily above the heads of restless students. At the front of the room, a teenage boy clutched a weathered guitar so tight his knuckles turned white. His name was Elvis Aaron Presley, age 18. A name that meant nothing yet to anyone outside this Mississippi town. It was the school's annual talent morning. A handful of students had already performed safe choices, piano pieces, recited poems, a country waltz or two. Then came Elvis, his voice trembling as he said, "I'd like to sing Old Shep." The room went still for a heartbeat. Then someone snickered. Mrs. Carter, his teacher, forced a smile. "Go on then, Mr. Presley," she said, the tone half amusement, half disbelief. He began softly. "When I was a lad and Old Shep was a pup." His voice was pure, a little raw but haunting. Yet halfway through the laughter came again, quiet at first, then louder. A shoe scuffed the floor. Mrs. Carter shook her head. "That'll do, Elvis. Maybe focus on your schoolwork instead." The words landed like a stone in his chest. He lowered his guitar, eyes stinging. Outside, the late afternoon light cut through the windows, golden and cruel. As he packed up, he overheard a classmate whisper, "He thinks he's some kind of cowboy singer." He didn't reply, but inside, something shifted. A promise formed in silence. That evening, he walked the dirt road home past the Tupelo hardware store, where he'd bought his first guitar at age 11. He paused by the window display and stared at the reflection staring back. A boy everyone thought was ordinary. "One day," he murmured, "they'll listen." His mother, Gladys, heard him strumming later that night, the melody soft but determined. "Elvis," she said, "don't you ever stop just 'cause someone laughs." He nodded, not trusting his voice. The cicadas hummed outside, almost in rhythm with his picking. Slow dissolve, sunset over Tupelo, tape hiss sound, faint Old Shep echo. For years that memory stayed with him, not as anger, but fuel. The sound of laughter became the sound of ignition. Every missed note turned into a vow. Someday he'd sing in a place where no one laughed. How many dreams have been buried because someone laughed too early? And how many voices never rose again after one teacher said, "You'll never make it"? When he lay in bed that night, he pictured a stage larger than any classroom. He couldn't see faces, only light, bright, blinding, endless. The kind of light that doesn't ask for permission. No one knew it then, but the same boy humiliated in a schoolroom that June would, within 3 years, walk into a tiny studio in Memphis and change music forever. Summer of 1954, Memphis, Tennessee. The pavement shimmered under the noon sun, and the hum of Beale Street was alive with horns, shouts, and jukebox crackle. Elvis Presley, now 19, stood in front of a narrow brick building at 706 Union Avenue. The sign above the door read, Sun Record Company. He'd saved for weeks working at Crown Electric, hauling cables and dreaming of microphones. In his pocket, $3.98, the cost to record a 2-sided acetate disc. Inside, the air smelled of cigarette smoke, hot tubes, and the faint tang of metal strings. The receptionist, Marion Keisker, glanced up from her typewriter and asked, "What kind of singer are you?" Elvis shifted, mumbled, "I sing all kinds." She smiled, polite but not convinced. When he started singing My Happiness, the small room changed. The trembling tone from Tupelo had grown into something deeper. Pain and longing wound into melody. The hum of the amp filled the space. Marion froze mid-keystroke. She called into the next room, "Sam! You might want to hear this." Faint tape reel starting. Static hiss. slow fade-in of guitar strum Sam Phillips, the studio's founder, walked in. Sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp. He studied Elvis for a moment, then said, "Son, sing another." This time, Elvis chose "That's When Your Heartaches Begin." The recording needle danced. Phillips nodded, slightly. Not approval, not rejection. Interest. When the song ended, silence hung heavy. Elvis looked down, thinking he'd failed again. Sam finally said, "You got something different, boy. I can't put my finger on it yet." That night, Elvis left Sun's studio unsure if he'd made an impression. But Marion Keisker wasn't done. She quietly made a note in the session log. Elvis Presley, good ballad singer. Keep his number. Close up on typewriter keys striking name Elvis Presley. Days turned into weeks. Elvis returned to his delivery job, driving across town with music in his head. At red lights, he practiced harmonies against the radio. When he got home, he told his mother, "Mama, I don't think they liked me." She said softly, "Then you go sing till they do." That line, gentle as it was, became his compass. Would you keep chasing a dream if no one told you when it would finally happen? Or would you let silence convince you it never will? In July, the call finally came. Sam wanted him back in the studio. "Bring your guitar," he said, "and maybe something fast this time." Elvis didn't sleep that night. The next day, he arrived to find two musicians waiting, Scotty Moore and Bill Black. They started fooling around with a song between takes. Elvis began strumming "That's All Right, Mama," fast, wild, laughing halfway through. Sam's head snapped up. "What was that?" he asked. They played it again, louder, tighter. The air itself seemed to vibrate. That moment, a jam no one planned, lit the fuse of rock and roll, real whirring faster, then the crackle of a radio DJ's voice. "We just got this new record by a local boy named Elvis Presley." Elvis didn't know it yet, but his voice was about to bounce across every diner, every dashboard, every kitchen radio from Memphis to Mississippi. And when his hometown heard it, one listener would stop cold. The same teacher who once told him to quit. The summer air in Tupelo carried a hum that felt electric. Posters lined Main Street. Elvis Presley, hometown concert, September 26, 1956. Nearly 12,000 people were expected. For the first time, East Tupelo's own son was returning as the most talked-about performer in America. Vendors set up hot dog stands. Teenagers pressed their faces against barricades. Families who'd known the Presleys when they had nothing now whispered, "He's really done it." And somewhere among them, sitting near the front in a pressed floral dress, was Mrs. Carter, the same teacher who'd once told him to give up. Crowd roar building, then fading under narration backstage at the Tupelo Fairgrounds. Elvis adjusted the collar of his gold jacket. He wasn't nervous about the crowd. He was nervous about one face. "She's here, isn't she?" he quietly asked his friend and guitarist Scotty Moore. Scotty nodded. "Front row," Elvis smiled faintly. "Then I'll play it like I mean it," as the announcer's voice boomed. "Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley." The noise exploded. Thousands screamed. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. He launched into Heartbreak Hotel, hips snapping, microphone trembling under his grip. Each lyric hit like thunder, and the fairground bleachers shook under stomping feet. But then, halfway through the set, he paused. He looked down at his mother's photo taped to his guitar, then toward the front row. His expression softened. "Y'all mind if I slow it down a bit?" The band quieted. The arena hushed. He leaned toward the mic. "This next one's for someone who heard it first." Then came the first notes of Old Shep. The crowd that had moments ago screamed now fell completely still. Only Elvis's voice carried through the night, steady, aching, remembering. He sang the same song he'd been mocked for 3 years earlier, in that classroom where laughter drowned his courage. But now, 12,000 listened in reverent silence. Mrs. Carter's eyes filled. Her hands trembled as she pressed a tissue to her mouth. The boy she'd told to be realistic was standing under floodlights, commanding thousands without a hint of bitterness. only grace. Soft spotlight, close-up of crowd faces, slow pan to Mrs. Carter wiping tears. The final line echoed through the grandstand. Old Shep, he's gone where the good dogs go. No pyrotechnics, no guitar solo, just silence. Then, a beat later, the eruption. The sound was deafening. People rose to their feet, clapping, crying, shouting his name. But Elvis didn't bow. He simply looked toward Mrs. Carter and gave a small nod. That was the night Tupelo learned that revenge doesn't always come in anger. Sometimes it arrives as mercy. As he walked off stage, Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, grabbed his arm. What was that slow song for, son? The crowd wants the hits. Elvis just said quietly, that one was for me. Outside, under the buzzing fairground lights, Mrs. Carter waited. Security almost turned her away, but Elvis waved them off. She whispered, voice shaking, Elvis, I shouldn't have said those things back then. He smiled gently. Mom, if you hadn't, maybe I wouldn't have tried so hard. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was a conversation between past and present, between the doubter and the dreamer. How many times do we meet the people who once broke our hearts? Not to prove them wrong, but to thank them for the push. And what if every cruel word was just fuel for the fire that made us unstoppable? The reporters later wrote that during that moment, the entire crowd had gone dead silent, as if even the Mississippi wind refused to interrupt. That concert became folklore, not because of the hits, but because of old Shep reel-to-reel tape sound, voiceover of local radio recap. Last night in Tupelo, Elvis Presley silenced 12,000 people with one song. The next morning, an envelope appeared backstage, unsigned but written in a careful, familiar hand. Inside, it was a letter that would change the tone of his story forever. The Tupelo sun had barely risen when a stagehand found the envelope resting against Elvis's guitar case. The handwriting was small, neat, the kind only a schoolteacher would use. On the front, it simply said, "For Elvis." He opened it slowly. Inside was a folded page from Line Stationery, faintly scented of lilac perfume. The first line read, "I once told you to be practical. I see now that faith is the most practical thing of all." It was signed Mrs. Carter. He sat in silence for a long time, letter trembling in his hand. For years, that one sentence in a high school classroom had echoed like a curse. Now it was gone, replaced by something softer. Forgiveness didn't need to be spoken. It had been written quietly in blue ink. Gentle paper rustle. Faint church bell in distance later that week. Local reporter Henry Adams interviewed Mrs. Carter. She admitted, "I told him once he'd never make it. I was wrong. He was born with something no classroom can measure." Her words were printed in the Tupelo Journal under the headline, "Teacher apologizes to Elvis Presley. He taught me to believe." For Elvis, that apology mattered more than the gold records on his wall, because behind every critic, there had always been that memory of her voice, that disbelief. Now it was replaced by grace. He sent her a note in return. "Mum, don't be sorry. You helped me find the reason I sing." Years passed. In 1961, after his military service, Elvis made a quiet visit back to Tupelo. There were no cameras, no announcements, just a Cadillac parked outside the old high school. He asked the janitor if Mrs. Carter still taught there. She had retired, so he left a bouquet of white roses on her desk, with a small tag. "For believing, even when you didn't." That single gesture, anonymous, unrecorded, would become one of the most retold stories in Tupelo. The following year, the letter Mrs. Carter had written was donated to the Elvis Birthplace Museum, framed behind glass, its edges slightly yellowed. It read like scripture to anyone who ever doubted themselves. Tourists still stopped there, staring at those words, whispering about the woman who once told the king of rock and roll to give up. It's easy to laugh now, but for Elvis, that small-town teacher was never the villain of his story. She was the spark that lit the match. Have you ever realized that the person who doubted you was also the one who accidentally gave you your purpose? And if they apologize today, would you still hold on to the hurt or the lesson. Slow montage, museum footage, framed letter, vintage newspaper clippings, crowd at candlelight vigil when asked years later about it. Elvis said softly in an interview, "She didn't believe back then, but she made me believe stronger. That's all that mattered." And even after his passing, that single exchange, a doubt and a forgiveness, would ripple through Tupelo in ways no one expected. It was the summer of 1977, the year the music stopped. When the news broke that Elvis Presley had passed, church bells rang across Mississippi. In Tupelo, thousands gathered at the East High Auditorium, the same place where a shy boy once sang Old Shep. Only now, the walls were lined with candles and portraits. At the front sat Mrs. Carter, her hair silver now, her hands clasped tight around a folded program that read, "In loving memory of Elvis Aaron Presley, the boy who believed." Around her were students, parents, neighbors, the same community that had once doubted and whispered. Now they wept openly. Soft choir hum under narration, faint echo of church organ. The mayor stepped to the podium. Elvis showed the world what Tupelo could give and what faith could build. Then he revealed something no one expected. A scholarship in Elvis's honor, the Presley Promise, for any student told they'll never make it. Applause filled the room. Mrs. Carter stood slowly, tears streaking down her cheeks. She whispered to the woman beside her, "That's exactly what I once told him." The next week, the town raised funds to restore the small white house where Elvis had been born. Volunteers painted the walls, planted roses, and built a small museum beside it. And right inside the entrance, mounted beneath glass, was Mrs. Carter's original apology letter. The ink faded, but the words unmissable. Visitors came from around the world. Some came to see the legend. Others came to read the letter that proved something deeper, that even the loudest no can one day turn into an I believe. Camera pans over the restored Presley home, crowd holding candles at dusk, distant echo of Love Me Tender. Reporters often asked Mrs. Carter why she chose to display that letter publicly. She always gave the same answer, "Because I want every child who walks through that door to know even teachers can be wrong." Years later, the very scholarship she inspired helped fund local musicians, nurses, and artists. On its first plaque, engraved in gold, were the words, "For those who dare to prove them wrong." The town that once laughed at a dreamer now taught its children to dream louder. In 1987, 10 years after his passing, Tupelo held a commemorative concert at the same fairgrounds where Elvis had silenced 12,000 people. The crowd was smaller, but the emotion wasn't. As a children's choir sang Old Shep, Mrs. Carter stood at the edge of the stage, eyes closed, mouthing every word. That night, a local journalist wrote, "The same teacher who once doubted him stood beneath the lights he left behind. Proof that grace can outlive regret." What if the people who once wounded us could see the person we became because of them? Would we offer them anger or gratitude? When the final song ended, Mrs. Carter whispered to the sky, "You did it, Elvis. You made them listen." Crowd applause fades to silence, then the soft crackle of an old radio playing Peace in the Valley. In that quiet moment, Tupelo wasn't mourning, it was remembering a boy who turned doubt into destiny, laughter into legacy. And long after the candles burned out, one final reflection would remain. Not just about Elvis, but about what his story means for anyone who's ever been told they couldn't. The story of Elvis Presley isn't just about fame, it's about faith in silence. Long before the gold records and the headlines, there was a boy who sang through laughter, who turned humiliation into harmony. And in that transformation, he proved something few ever do, that belief, when tested, becomes its own kind of music. Years later, a surviving radio interview surfaced, the crackle of tape barely holding his voice. The interviewer asked, "Elvis, What made you keep going when everyone told you no? He paused, then said softly, because every no sounded like a song waiting to be sung. That line became the heartbeat of his legacy. When people visit Tupelo today, they don't just come to see a birthplace. They come to stand in the quiet. That moment before a dream starts, when no one believes but you. Inside the museum, the framed letter still hangs beneath warm glass. The words have faded, but the meaning hasn't. Children press their faces close to read it. Parents whisper the story about the teacher, the song, and the boy who never quit. Because the real music was never just on stage. It was in how he rose after being told to sit down. Every story like his carries an echo. The voice that once said, "You can't," will one day whisper, "You did." Elvis never sought revenge. He offered redemption. That's what made his silence after the applause so powerful. It wasn't empty. It was peace. When you think of your own life, whose voice still tells you that you can't? And what would it sound like to prove them wrong? Not with anger, but with grace. Elvis once told a friend, "Truth is like the sun. You can shut it out for a while, but it ain't going away." He was right. The truth of who he was, the dreamer, the believer, the forgiving son of Tupelo, still shines. Because every time Old Shep plays and a crowd somewhere grows quiet, it's not just a song. It's a memory, a promise, a sound that says, don't stop believing just because they did. If someone once told you you'd never make it, remember Elvis and sing anyway. Share this story with someone chasing their dream in silence. Because sometimes the loudest "I told you so" is played, not spoken.